Ever wonder who builds those systems, the ones that power our data-driven world? Well, today we're doing a deep dive into database design. And trust me, it's a lot more interesting than it might sound at first.
Yeah, definitely.
We're going to be digging into excerpts from RoleCatcher's career guides to really break down what these, what did you call them?
Oh, I called them digital architects.
Right, digital architects. I like that. So we're going to figure out what they do and how someone listening can become one.
And you're right. It's not just about the technical stuff, though. That's definitely important. But a lot of people, they compare database designers to like architects who design buildings.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it makes sense. Just like a well-designed building, it makes sure that people can move around easily. They can find what they need. Well, a database designer, they do the same thing, but for information.
Okay, that makes total sense. But it's got to be more than just like technical skills, right?
What else did these guides say makes a database designer really stand out?
You're absolutely right. It's definitely multifaceted. The guides really emphasize like the human element of it all.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because think about it, database designers, they have to talk to everyone, from the tech people to the business people. They have to figure out what information everybody needs to access and how they're going to use it and how to make it all make sense.
So they're like translators, kind of,
Mm.
turning those real-world needs into a digital, I don't know, like a digital landscape. Exactly. They wrangle the data, but also everyone's expectations and priorities. And that's not always easy.
Yeah, I bet.
The guide actually breaks down the career path into different stages. So you start with like junior roles where you're still learning, and then you can move all the way up to like principal database designer.
Wow.
Yeah. And at that level, you're basically defining the entire data strategy for a whole organization.
That's a lot of responsibility. So, like, for someone who wants to get started, get their foot in the door, what are some of the skills that these guides highlight as being really important?
Well, first off, you're not going to get very far if you don't know SQL.
Right, that's the language databases.
Exactly. But then it's also about things like data modeling techniques.
Mm.
So you know how to organize information really efficiently, and you need to know how to work with all these different database management systems.
Sounds like a lot.
Yes. But that's what's exciting about it. And the thing is, the learning never really stops. The guide really stresses how important continuous professional development is. You've got to stay on top of your game, especially with new technology popping up all the time.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's where certifications come in, like those from Oracle, Microsoft, AWS. Those are really valuable.
It's like a stamp of approval or something.
Right. Shows you know what you're doing.
Speaking of staying ahead of the curve, these guides are from RoleCatcher, which is really interesting because they actually use AI to help people navigate the job market.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing.
So it's not just a source of information for our little deep dive here. It's a perfect example of how technology is changing things for people looking for jobs in this field, too.
Totally. Like RoleCatcher's AI, it can take a job description and tell you exactly what skills the employer wants.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it can even score your CV based on how well you match up.
That's wild.
It's like having a robot recruiter, but in your pocket.
Okay, that sounds super helpful, especially with how competitive everything is these days. But I am curious, what else does RoleCatcher do that gives job seekers an advantage? What else can it do?
Well, there's this other cool feature they have called RoleCatcher Capture, and it's this like browser plugin.
Okay.
And what it does is it lets you save job postings from like anywhere online.
Oh, that's smart.
So you don't have a million tabs open or you don't lose track of a good listing. But I think beyond those like really practical features, what RoleCatcher really pushes is this like smarter way to look for a job. Instead of just sending out your resume everywhere, it helps you be more strategic.
Oh,
So
interesting.
you understand what the employer actually wants and you can like tailor your approach to stand out.
So it's not about spamming everyone. It's about being strategic.
Right. And speaking of being strategic, we should talk about interview prep
Oh, yeah, good idea.
because the guide goes into that too. They have 10 sample interview questions that are specifically for database designers.
Okay, so what do those look like? Give me an example.
Well, they're not just the typical, tell me about yourself kind of questions.
Yeah.
These get into like what you actually need to know in the real world on the job.
So it's less about reciting facts and more about showing you can actually, like, think on your feet.
Exactly. It's about showing how you approach a problem and how you use your knowledge to come up with solutions to real challenges.
Huh.
And the guide, it even gives you an idea of what the interviewers are looking for and what to avoid saying.
Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah, definitely. It can make you a lot more confident. But I think we should take a step back for a second and talk about the bigger picture. Like, why should someone even care about database design in the first place? What kind of impact does this field even have on the world? Now, that is the million-dollar question that every aspiring database designer should be prepared to answer. And with passion, too. You've got to be enthusiastic. But seriously, think about it. Practically everything we do these days generates data. Online shopping, healthcare, social media, it's all data. And database designers, they're the ones who build the systems that make sense of it all.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So it's not just about the technical side, it's about making the information actually usable.
Exactly. They make sure the data is accessible, that you can analyze it, that it can be used to make decisions. It's pretty big when you think about it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, their work lets businesses run smoothly, helps researchers discover things, even lets governments do their jobs better.
Right. It really does have a ripple effect.
It's amazing how much impact they have that we don't even realize. Okay, I have to ask about this because the guide mentions how big data is impacting database design. Is that just about managing a ton more information, or is there more to it?
Oh, it's definitely more complicated than that. Big data brings a whole bunch of new challenges, which the guide actually calls, get this, the three Vs.
The three Vs. Okay, I have to ask, what are they?
Volume, velocity, and veracity.
Volume, velocity, veracity. Okay, it does sound a little bit like a superhero origin story, I have to admit. But what do those actually mean for a database designer? Like, what are they dealing with in the real world?
Okay, so imagine this. Volume, that's the easy one. We're talking massive amounts of data, like oceans of data, not just a lake. Database designers, they have to build systems that can actually handle all that information without, crashing and burning.
That's a lot of data. So what about velocity? I'm guessing that's about how fast the data is coming in.
Exactly. Velocity is all about speed. Think about real-time stuff like sensors, or financial transactions. It never stops. So a database designer needs to create a system that can keep up with that constant flow of information and process it immediately.
It's like drinking from a fire hose, probably. So you've got these mountains of data coming in super fast. What's veracity then?
Okay, so veracity, that's about how much you can trust the data. Because when you have all this information from everywhere, you have to make sure that it's accurate.
Right, it's not just random junk.
Exactly. A database designer might have to figure out how to get rid of fake news on social media, for example, or make sure that the data coming from a sensor is actually correct and not just some glitch.
That's a big responsibility. So
Yeah.
you're not just building a database, you're basically making sure that all the information flowing through it is legit.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole field so interesting, I think, because it's like you're at the forefront of how we manage and use all this data. The guy actually gives examples of how a well-designed database can lead to, like, breakthroughs, like making deliveries faster or figuring out patterns in healthcare data to help patients.
That's incredible. So behind all these things we take for granted, there's a database designer making it happen.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
And as we rely on data more and more to make decisions, database designers are going to become even more important. They're the ones building the foundation for, well, basically everything. New products, understanding customers, even things like climate change. It all comes back to data.
It all connects. And speaking of connections, the guide talks about how AI is being used now in database design itself, which is fascinating. What's that all about?
Yeah, so we're seeing more AI-powered database systems,
Yeah.
like having a super smart assistant who can automate things and make sure everything is running smoothly.
It's like having a coworker who never sleeps and never needs coffee.
Right. But even with all that, you still need humans. The database designers, they're the ones who make the big decisions and set the strategy and make sure that everything is being used ethically.
So it's not about being replaced by robots. It's about using those robots to do your job even better.
Exactly. And that's why you always have to keep learning in this field. The guide really pushes that. Stay curious, embrace new technology, just like we were saying about AI. Always be ready to learn.
And on that note of evolving and learning, it's interesting because the guide doesn't just talk about the technical skills. It also talks about how important soft skills are for database designers, which I don't think a lot of people realize. What are some of the big takeaways there? What did they say?
It goes back to what we were talking about earlier about how database designers have to be able to talk to the tech people and the business people.
Right, they're kind of like the bridge between those two worlds.
Exactly. So the guide talks a lot about communication, being able to explain things clearly, listening to what other people need, building good relationships.
So not just a code whisperer, but also a people person.
Exactly. Database designers usually work in teams, so you have to be able to collaborate. And then there's problem solving. That's a big one. because you're always trying to figure out the best solution to these complex problems, and often under pressure too, which is tough.
Yeah, that's a lot. It sounds like you need this balance of technical skills and like people skills to really succeed.
I think so. And the good news is the guide says you can learn those things as you go, especially if you have good mentors and you're not afraid to, get out of your comfort zone.
Right. Got to challenge yourself. Okay. I want to circle back to something we mentioned earlier about interviews because I know a lot of people listening are probably thinking about that. The guide gave those 10 sample interview questions, but what kind of advice did it give about how to actually answer them? Like, how do you impress someone in an interview for a database designer job? So it's not just about knowing the right answer, it's about how you explain it, how you get there. What were some of the tips they gave?
Well, they said the worst thing you can do is just try to memorize answers from a textbook.
Right, because they want to see how you think.
Exactly. They called it like telling a story.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. But instead of like, princesses and dragons, it's a story about data. And you're the hero using your skills to solve a problem.
Okay, I like that. So what makes a good story in this case? What did they say?
They recommended using something called the STAR method.
Star method. Okay, I've heard of that, I think, but remind me.
So you start by describing the situation. Like, what was the challenge you were facing? The specific task. You're setting the scene, basically.
Yeah, giving them context.
Right. And then you talk about the task, what your specific role was, what you are responsible for. And then this is the important part. You get into the action. So you describe step by step how you tackled that challenge, what you actually did.
So they can see your process,
Yeah.
how you actually work.
Yeah, exactly. And then you wrap it all up with the result. What happened because of what you did? What was the outcome? Hopefully a good one.
Right, a success story. It's like a mini case study, but about you.
Exactly. And the guide even gives examples of how to use that same structure, that STAR method, to answer different types of questions. So not just technical ones, but also those questions about, working in a team or being a leader.
It's a good framework for any kind of question, really.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, this has been a really interesting deep dive. I feel like we learned a lot. I know I did. But for someone listening who's thinking, okay, maybe database design is for me, what's the one thing you hope they take away from all of this?
I think the biggest thing is I hope they understand just how important database designers are. They're not just, tech people hiding behind computers. They're the ones solving problems, making decisions. They're shaping how we use information every single day.
And it sounds like it takes a special kind of person, too. Someone who's not just technical, but also creative and a good communicator who can think strategically about the big picture.
Yeah, definitely. And someone who's always ready to learn because this field changes so fast.
Which is exciting. It means there's always something new to discover. And hey, if you're just starting out, remember tools like RoleCatcher, they can make things a lot easier.
For sure.
Well, on that note, that's about all the time we have for today's deep dive. But to everyone listening, we'll leave you with this. Now that you have a better understanding of the world of database design, how are you going to use it? Not just to build systems, but to shape the future.
It's a big question, but an important one.
It is. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.
See you then.